Advisory Commission. Can I ask the clerk to call roll call?
Yes. Chair Farmer,
Here.
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner Paulson,
Here.
Commissioner Zaidi,
Here.
Commissioner McAmey.
Here.
I would like to make sure that proper notice has been established for this meeting.
Proper notice has been established for this meeting.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 2. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any items that are not covered on this agenda that are under the jurisdiction of this commission?
Does not look like there's anybody at this moment.
Thank you. Which brings us to number 3, staff updates on public comment. I think we're going to hear from Sherry first.
All right. Yes, thank you, Chair Farmer. Sherry Johnson. So I'll give a brief summary of the comments that we have received from the beginning. So I'll just go over them briefly, and all commissioners have received a copy of these comments. So, keep Mendocino in District 5, 66 comments. Keep Laytonville in District 3, 55. Move Hopland to District 1, 27. 17 favors map 8. Limit all changes to equalizing District 3 and District 4, 6 comments. Move Laytonville to District 4 only if between moving Mendocino to District 5 and Hopland to District 1, 5 comments. 3 favors for map 2, 3 for favor of map 1, 2 for map 7. Keep Redwood Valley and Potter Valley together in District 1, 2 comments. Add areas adjacent to City of Ukiah to District 2, 2 comments. 2 comments in favor of map 9 and 1 in favor of map 10. Make District 5 more coastal, 1 comment. Move Mendocino to District 4. Need to equalize District 4 now or face some population problems, 2 comments. Move Covelo to District 1. Move part of Covelo to District 1, so there's 2 comments. And keep Ridgewood Park out of District 4 or District 5, 1 comment. Expand District 3 to the coast based on topography, transportation connectivity, and emergency evacuation planning, 1 comment. And then public comment favoring maps or proposing boundaries which do not comply with the redistricting criteria. We've received 10 comments.
Thank you, Sherry. Does Charlotte have any changes for us regarding the deadline for redistricting?
No changes to the deadline. I'm keeping video off to preserve connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. And we're going to move on to Commissioner's comment. It looks like Peter has something to say.
Yeah, I want to go back to Sherry's report. When I look at the numbers, Sherry, that you list within the boxes on the left-hand side for each of those items, they don't add up to the number in the box on the right-hand side. Can you just explain why there's a difference?
Through the chair, Charlotte Scott, I think I can explain that difference. So the very first central theme of that box, keep Mendocino in District 5 / favor no change to District 4 and 5 boundaries. That I didn't split out, but by number, so that would address any additional comments that didn't get more particular. And in addition, there are some public comments that address more than one theme. So that's why you won't see all of the numbers add up. But really, this is an approximation. There could be maybe a little bit of leeway in interpreting some comments. But really, for the purposes of this summary, we're really just trying to provide you the overall themes, the predominant themes. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. I was just confused by the fact that when I tried to add up the numbers in the various boxes, they didn't correlate back to the numbers in the box next door. Some of them don't have any number counts in parentheses at all. So I think I understand what you've done, and thank you for kind of giving us a flavor of what the sentiment of all of these comments are. I know it must be somewhat difficult to discern, since many of the comments address multiple maps and multiple thoughts. So I'm sure that's in part how why the counts don't necessarily match up on a one-by-one basis. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I just wanted to say it that we have been creating these maps throughout the public comment period, and so the votes per map I don't think reflect something that we should be taking too seriously, that some of the earlier maps have more votes than the later ones. I don't think that necessarily represents the state of people's opinion. So I just wanted to kind of say that out loud. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment on this item.
That brings us to community outreach. Can we hear from staff about what more has been done to bring people in?
Yes, Chair Farmer. So the county and the staff continue to send weekly e-notifications to registered citizens, and over 900 emails have gone out. We have had the public service announcements on the radio, and we have had a special press release for today's meeting. So that's the notifications that we have continued to do.
Thank you, Sherry. Does anybody else want to share public outreach efforts that they've had since our last meeting? Do we have any commissioner comment on this item? I guess it's the same thing. And do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment on this item.
Thank you. So that brings us to agenda item number 5, community of interest testimony. I'm curious if staff has anybody in the wings interested in doing a live community of interest testimony.
Does not look like it at this time.
Do we have any commissioner comment on the community of interest testimony? And is there any public comment on this item?
We do have one public comment on this item.
Okay.
And Paul, you'll be able to talk.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very, very much for your continued public outreach, particularly with regards to more recent maps. And Kyle, thank you for mentioning that comment on more recent maps might simply be driven because people had looked at the others and maybe moved on. That being said, in terms of consideration of the draft maps, I'm hoping, against hope, that we will look more closely at one of the newer maps, and that's draft 11. What drives my comment is, for better or worse, cannabis, both in the traditional market and the newly legalized market, has been an economic driver in our county for many, many years, if not decades. And so as we've moved into legalization, I think it's important to take a look at where the majority of both smaller and medium-sized farmers are growing cannabis, not only in terms of preserving community, but also as an economic driver, a continued economic driver for our county and our state. So I would just like to throw my support to draft 11, because looking at Laytonville, Covelo, Leggett, that area, I think it makes more sense in terms of community interest. They too are interesting, but I think that ultimately the interests of communities on the coast may be quite different than the interests of communities as we move more inland. Thank you very much for giving me the time to comment. My friend Paul may want to comment next. Paul, do you have a comment?
No, I think you've said it all. It's just keeping a continuous community and keeping them one, and having a supervisor that's on board with those sorts of things is really important. And rather than having a divisive supervisor with the common community, I think that keeping that supervisor with that constituency with a unified front, I think would be better than trying to have it split up with different agendas from different supervisors. I think you catch my drift. Thanks very much.
So they mentioned draft 11. So that brings us to agenda item number 6, consideration of map based on community input. Dee, did you have something to say before we move on?
Yeah, before we move on, please. I was going to try not to repeat myself, but I feel like there's just to say it out loud one more time. There's a lot of communities of interest in our county that are going to have to pay the price of the criteria for redistricting, and I think everyone needs to hear it. I know all 5 of us understand it, but from the public comments that keep coming in, that don't split my community, don't, you know, keep my community intact, do it somewhere else. And everyone always has a suggestion. One of them was even to split Ukiah in 2, because Ukiah has a city council, so their representation on the county level isn't as critical as some of the other communities of interest. And I just want to say it out loud so that everyone who is listening and cares understands that someone is going to have to, some community is going to have to pay the price just based on the criteria. Not everyone's going to be happy. And we have to, I hope that people understand that we have to take the criteria very seriously in order when we make our suggestions to the Board of Supervisors. In a perfect world, things would be different. I mean, Kyle had reminded me of a ballot measure a couple years ago where they were trying to get us to move to a charter county, and that could solve our problems, because then we could have more than 5 districts. And I think that's the only way that we're going to make everybody happy. With the 5 districts that we are being mandated to work within, we can't make everybody happy. And so I just want to say it out loud once again, that I hope everybody understands that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dee. Do we have any more commissioner comment on that item? And any more public comment?
No more. Oh, looks like we have one more. It looks like Paul would like to talk again. Okay, I'm not sure if Paul's there, but I do see that Ron wants to talk, so we will come back to Paul.
Thank you. And Dee, I agree. It's really difficult with every community wanting not to have the line drawn there. But I think that this issue, particularly in the 3rd district, is not only just a community of interest, it's also an economic interest, as Susan articulated. The coast and the inland are so really different, and it's really hard to find a way to equally represent those within the same district. So I hope that yes, it's difficult, but I think that this is a unique enough situation and different economic and even social community issues that it really is one that if we were looking at this as a racial or a political party issue that we'd have to be looking at. So I think that those differences are just equally as important as those. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I did want to point out that map number 11 has a variation of 60.65%. So that is actually twice the variation of the brainstorming watershed map we did. That I think if we were looking at this as some sort of political revolution we were going to try to have, would probably be the map to look at. So, clearly there are layered senses of the political life in this county. But the primary focus here is the aspect of democracy that is one voter, one here. That Charlotte, can you say this better for me? One vote,
One vote.
one person, one vote. There we go.
One person, one vote.
So I do understand people's frustration. What Leaf has accomplished in some of these later drafts in terms of how many rabbits he was able to pull out of hats to try to make the Laytonville issue better by both moving the 4 to 5 line south and the 1 to 3 line north to deal with the population issues instead of viewing it as a first order problem between 3 and 4. He was accommodating it as a second order problem. Is really, I mean, the public comment that we have been hearing from Laytonville should be, cheering for what Leaf accomplished within the bounds of what has been put forth, which is, as much as it's more abstract, an extremely important part of how our democracy works, the one person, one vote dynamic. And so I think it's great that we have some of these maps to see what could be possible, but 60.65% is not something that we're going to, work around the edges and turn into a workable map. So Dee, did you have anything to say?
I think you said it better than I could have. But just to remind, we're hearing a lot from people from the cannabis industry and how they want their community, they feel their community of interest needs to be represented in a certain way or by certain people. I just ask you to think of the greater Ukiah area that's being divided into 3 districts. The West Ukiah Hills from Ore Springs Road, Parducci Road, Spanish Canyon, Oak Knoll. These are all Ukiah neighborhoods, and they are in the 5th district, and they have absolutely nothing in common on a socioeconomic level with the coastal communities. Yet we are asking them to to just go with the flow so we can meet the criteria. To repeat again, we can't make it work for everybody. We hear you, but it just won't happen. But we have to stick to the one person, one vote and make that our priority. And I hope that people will understand that we're doing the best we can, and that I think 2 things, supervisors need to recognize this, and maybe our supervisors need to start working as more of a unit and working together to cross these lines where representation is so cloudy. And then also, if you feel strongly about it, reach out to Charter Mendocino and see if they want to pick up that flag again. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. I guess I'll ask one more time in case any more public comment came online.
We do have some more public comment.
Okay.
Michael's going to be able to talk here.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Michael Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. I'm not been following as in depth with these proceedings, but I'm glad I had the chance to listen in this evening. What I've just kind of heard was that you guys have been getting a bunch of comments from the cannabis industry, and that the cannabis industry probably should get ready to have those not be accommodated, because it sounded like everybody has to understand that we all have to work together, but that kind of sounded like it was being said in specific relationship to comments the cannabis industry has made. And one component that I would like for this committee to consider is that our small licensed cannabis community within Mendocino has been designated as a worthy of social equity support from the state, based on the disproportionate amount of damage done to this community by the war on drugs. And so this is a particularly disadvantaged community, and it's been identified specifically through these state programs. And so I just would like folks to consider that it's not just, a minority community. It is a very important part of our socioeconomic fabric, and that has been consistently underrepresented. And so I just encourage this group to consider the fact that these engaged citizens have been reaching out. And while I see that my comments are maybe not being well received by some members of this committee, I certainly encourage everyone to consider them fully. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. And I do feel that we have done everything possible to really look at all of these comments coming from these different areas in the borders between the districts. And I think if you look at, for example, draft map 1, that was the simplest way to move population to deal with the fact that District 4 had lost population and District 3 had gained, which is the fundamental thing we came into this trying to figure out. If you look at the way that the map has shifted over time, I do feel like in terms of the communities in Laytonville and the surrounding areas having whatever chance they have to elect someone that they feel is representing them has been accommodated really as best as we could probably do with the cards we started. I actually didn't get around to it, but I was going to make a matrix of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on one side and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the other. I'm pretty sure that the 4th district losing population and the 3rd district gaining was about the toughest line change. If you think about it, if the 5th district had lost, if the 1st district had lost population and the 5th district had gained, we would have moved Topland and we would have been done. You know what I mean? Or if the other thing had happened and the 3rd district had lost and the 4th district had gained, we would have moved the line west and everybody would have been cheering. So those particular population dynamics were challenging based on the existing communities of interest. And yes, especially the hills east of the 101 and west of the 101. But I think if people who are watching kind of look at the evolution of the maps and they understand that we are limited by that 10% and historically have limited to 6% deviation from the biggest to the smallest, they will see that you really aren't going to push up much further than Leaf managed to push it. Mary?
I think a lot of people adjust what may happen 10 years from now. And they're probably perfectly correct. We can only do so much in this cycle. I think the cannabis community will have a larger impact perhaps in 10 years. However, I would tell them that when we expanded to Upper Laytonville, to use that, we did add to their territory within District 3, which helps them somewhat. At the same time, we have taken from other people as well to balance out our maps. And I think we've done it. I think if anybody wants to pursue the idea of changing our charter so that we can have 6 districts, I can see the future that it may possibly be needed. Thank you very much.
Do we have any more public comment on this item?
No more public comment for this.
Okay. That brings us to the maps. Item number 6, consideration of maps based on community input. I'm hoping Leaf can bring up the map that he thinks is most useful for us to start looking at right now. Dee, did you want to say something before we started?
Could we eliminate some maps that we know aren't, we shouldn't even just say these map numbers we can't even consider, and then just look at the ones that are actually viable?
Leaf, is that the way to proceed, or should we look at the newest walk through the maps you've created?
Well, if you want to eliminate some maps, that would be the decision of the commission. You know, some of these maps have evolved over time as we've worked on them. Possibly the two that you've worked on the most are versions 8, 9, and 10. Version 8, draft 8, has some issues that don't necessarily meet all the public comment that we've received, although it does well in balancing the population. 8 and 9 are probably the two maps that go the furthest in trying to meet all the public comment that we've received so far. You know, that's not to mean that they don't have issues and that we've accomplished everything that people want us to. But those are probably your two latest maps that you've worked on that come the closest. However, all the maps are available for you to look at and discuss.
Peter? Peter, you're muted.
Mute.
Okay. Since we're looking for a way to proceed in this discussion, I'm gonna make some recommendations. I looked at all 11 maps, and the first cut, so to speak, to try to reduce the possible number of maps for recommendation to the Board of Supervisors was to look at the population variation number, and any of the maps that exceeded the 10% that's legally mandated as a standard. Then I said you can learn from the maps in terms of public sentiment and possibly what their intent is, but they can't be recommended for adoption since they wouldn't survive a legal test at all. And so what I did then is I took out of contention for consideration maps number 3, maps number 4, maps number 6, and maps number 11. And I would suggest to the commission that those 4 maps, while they're informative, and can't be ones that we could recommend to the Board of Supervisors based on the population variation. And then, if I may, I would also suggest 3 additional maps, which I think have the least, while they meet the basic under 10% population variation requirement, they have flaws that also make them less than desirable maps to recommend to the Board of Supervisors. And those 3 were map number 1, map number 5, and map number 7. Primarily, the reasons why I think those 3 maps are not maps that we could recommend to the board, or at least I couldn't recommend them to the board, was because of the impact they had on communities of interest in the county, and the clear message that we got from public input over the period that we were looking at maps. These are maps that were in contrast and contrary to the expression of communities of interest that people wanted to retain. So I would say that those three maps are also maps that I could not support. I don't know how the other commissioners feel about that. What that left after I took those maps out of the 11 maps were 4 maps. Map number 2, map number 8, map number 9, and map number 10. And so I would recommend to the commission that if they concur with what I've just outlined as a criteria, that we focus on whether or not any of those 4 maps are maps that we would like to recommend to the Board of Supervisors. And I'm, of course, perfectly willing to hear anybody or be susceptible to any persuasion that other maps that I've excluded from my review in this way should be included with those, in addition to those 4. But those would be my 4. So I guess the simpler way for me to say it is, I would recommend that we focus our attention on those 4 maps: map number 2, map number 8, map number 9, and map number 10.
I'd agree with Peter about in the negative of what he just said. I would add to that eliminating map number 2 as it splits Round Valley Tribes reservation, which I think was kind of a non-starter. So that would bring us down to 8, 9, and 10. Am I correct, Peter?
Yeah, that if you, I would respond, since I thought map number 2, at least potentially in my ranking of the 4 maps, was actually the 3rd best choice. And the reason, I'll concede what you say, that it would have a significant impact on one of the communities of interest. But as we've struggled and others have commented, no matter what we do, somebody's community of interest is going to be impacted. I think map number 2 has some qualities that, like I said, when I ranked the maps, it fell into the top 3 choices that I had, and it was because it did a very efficient job of equalizing the district populations. So it has, of all of the ones that we're talking about now, it has the lowest variation of population at 5.7%, 5.76% variation, which gives it a big plus. But I'll concede it isn't sensitive enough to the communities of interest or at meeting a 1 person, 1 vote goal, at least in comparison to, say, map number 9 and map number 10. And we haven't really talked too much about the tables that have been attached to these maps. But one of the things that I looked at was, I looked at the adult population by district to determine whether or not, as an indicator, let me say not determine, but as an indicator of whether or not it would roughly take the same amount of votes in any district to be elected to be supervisor. And one of the things that I looked at was trying to figure out how much variation there was between an ideal goal, which, if you looked at the populations in each district, there were, I believe, if you had equal districts in terms of adult eligible populations, every district would have an adult eligible population of 12,449 or something like that. So when I looked at those numbers that were listed in the attached table to the maps, one of the things I did was I went through by each district and figured out what the variation was between on that map between each district and that ideal average number of adult eligible voters. In doing that, the map that did the best job at equalizing, or what you've said earlier, one person, one vote to elect a supervisor to represent the people in that district. It was actually map number 9 that had the lowest variation by district, by district, by district across the board. Map number 2 had a variation that was about a third higher than that. The second best map was map number 10, which had a slightly higher variation from in terms of the adult population in the districts than map number 9. So unfortunately, when you look at map number 8, it has a much higher variation. It takes a lot fewer people to elect a supervisor in some districts than it does in other districts. And if we're trying to say that everybody in the county should have an equal amount of voting power to elect a supervisor to represent them before the Board of Supervisors, then we would want to have as little variation in that as possible. Unfortunately, the reality is, and maybe I'm lecturing to the choir here, I mean, what all of this data shows, and I'm sure Leaf probably, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I can't speak for Leaf, but I would think he would have already noticed this, which is when you look at the inland districts versus the coastal districts in terms of the demographics, the thing that jumps out at you is that the people who on the coast are older and they have less children. So when you compare them on an equal population by equal population basis, what you find is the number of voters necessary to elect a supervisor drops dramatically on the inland districts because they have more kids who can't vote in elections. That's just the bottom line, and it's the reality that you have to deal with. The people on the coast are not just lifestyle different, they're age different. And as a result, on a per population basis, there are more adults living on the coast than there are inland. And it makes it difficult. It's an added challenge to try to respect the notion of one person, one vote, if you don't take that into consideration. So in regard to map number 2, it actually does a pretty good job of equalizing the population, and it came in third when I tried to rank it based on variation from the ideal number of people who are of voting age in the district. So that'd be my comment. I don't, like I said, I ranked it number 3. So if we're going to make a recommendation of number of 3 or 2 or 1, I would be voting for it as the third one in my rank of possible choices.
Yeah, can we pull up multi-winner ranked choice voting on a Zoom session?
Well, I'm a big fan of ranked voting. So, oh yeah, I'm a big fan of that. But that's personal.
I look using the similar criteria, but also for me, putting communities of interest, the comments that we received from the public first, and then the population numbers or the one person, one vote second. The maps that I think are viable are 5, 7, 9, and 10. And if you, for me, the most viable, or the one that I prefer the most, is number 10, with one slight caveat. if you look at the total at the tables, as Peter suggested, we have the lowest voting population in districts 1 and 2. I would like to, my preference would be to take number 10 and add to it the Western Hills census blocks that we can to both 1 and 2 to bring those numbers up just a little bit. I think if you get to the east side of 101 in Redwood Valley, you may be able to pull in a couple census blocks from District 5 to boost the numbers just a little bit in District 1. And the same thing in the Western Hills of Ukiah, if we pull in as much as we can to stay under the 10%, but to even out the adult populations a little bit more. I think as long as I'm understanding the boundary between 4 and 5 correctly, where Casper is still whole and still in District 4, then I think that it best captures the input that we received from the public and also meets the criteria that we've been tasked to work within.
Charlotte, I see that your hand is raised.
I think that I believe the commission understands this, and I just wanted to point out, in terms of looking at substantially equal population, we have to base that on the census data that's state adjusted, and rather than the citizen voting age population. And I realize, I certainly understand the reasoning and the considerations that Peter and Dee are raising. And I think peripherally, I can understand how they're coming into your analysis. I would just caution against relying on the tables, which are really only required and provided to show whether there is a Voting Rights Act issue with our county that has to be addressed, and any compliance issues. It isn't, they aren't figures that we can rely on for making a determination based on one person, one vote. And that's all. But I understand, I believe the commission understands that. I just wanted to point that out for the record. Oops.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, we could host a whole other Zoom session that could be sort of a history of democratic evolution. Where there are these fascinating ways that the votes are sort of embedded, the children's votes are sort of embedded in their parents' votes. And there's all sorts of fascinating things going on. But Leaf, I see you have your hand raised, and I know Paula and Mary do as well. But I've been letting staff cut in line to make things efficient.
Well, since we're on the
Okay.
topic of population statistics and data, a couple of things to remember, that the citizen voting age data and the census data are two different animals. They're collected differently, they're tabulated differently. The census, there's probably a reason why the law requires us to use the census data, because it's the most accurate count. It's actually, you go out and count people. The citizens voting age is survey data. So they've collected survey data, and a lot of it's generated statistically, and it's not tabulated down to the block level. That was artificially tabulated to the block level. In areas where you have small population, like Mendocino County, that's under 100,000, the error rate reaches 30 to 40% in some areas with the citizen voting age data. That's something to remember. So the other thing to remember is that if you're 9 years old today, 10 years from now, or 9 years from now, you're a voting person in Mendocino County. So, there's all these different age cohorts will come to voting age between now and the 10 years is up. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Leaf. The story, the plot thickens even more, huh? Mary.
I think Peter made some very good points. So did Paula. I'm not sure on two things. One, I don't know, can we actually institute changes? Because we have to come to a decision today. And if you change a map, it has to be published for public comment, as I understand it. Secondly, I disagree with Peter on draft 2, and that I think there was a strong consensus for Hopland to be moved and watersheds to be more respected. And I just cannot go with breaking up the reservation. That has been, that's a very old community of interest in this county that has been very poorly represented until now. Thank you.
Paula?
Okay. Yes, and as I was looking at it and kind of calculating it, I had looked at map 8, and actually I discounted that because when I go back to the public comment, there's very strong, a number of people interested in putting Hopland kind of more inland where it goes. So I'll cut to my chase is maps either 9 or 10. 10 I think is preferable. They're a little over the percentage, or under the 10%. They're a little over the 3 to 5 that you guys have been working on. But I think that if what I'm hearing from everybody else also, we want to do the least harm. Another 10 years, things will be very different, but I was trying to respect keeping the village Mendocino area in District 5, the Hopland, the Hopland comments were very resonant with me. And my other one was Laytonville. There are a lot there, and so those are at this point, the ones I'd like to talk to. The other thing is, whatever we present, we're presenting to the Board of Supervisors, and they have the final say. So I don't know whether we also, when we present them, do we give any kind of narrative of why we're selecting one or the other, or the attributes of one versus the other? And that's something I don't know.
Charlotte, did you want to answer that?
So maybe
Through the chair, if you'd like, I can. What we can do and what we anticipated for the Board of Supervisors meeting coming up would be that whatever maps that this commission recommends, that we would present, the staff would present them with the chair, and of course the commissioners would certainly be entitled to be present, of course, and add any additional comment. But we anticipated providing a presentation with the recommended draft maps and a brief narrative explaining the criteria or the input and considerations that the main themes that kind of drove each of the maps recommended by the commission. And I think that we've been, as the commission has noted, these maps have evolved, and it's been an iterative process that we can kind of see that. I started to work on a summary of each map, and I think we can certainly go, when you've narrowed it down, discuss how you would like, if you have time and would like to get into those details, if you have certain specific points you want us to share in that presentation or highlight with the draft map, we are happy to accommodate and for the presentation to the board.
And Charlotte, could you also answer, I guess, both Dee and Mary's question about if in this session we are able to adjust maps further?
Yes, I believe you are, because again, this is recommending maps that would be published then before the meeting, which the board will be considering them. So I believe, as we've been doing all along, as long as they are published in advance of the Board of Supervisors meeting next week, and that provides time for the public to provide input at that meeting, I think we can certainly do that.
Thank you, Peter. I was going to recommend something, and if this comment, if you still need to make the comment, please do. Paula mentioned her top 2 maps. I was going to suggest that we go around the digital table and each say 2 maps in the order of preference and see where that gets us.
Yeah, I was muted again. No, okay. I was going to say, just based on the comments that I heard from my fellow commissioners, I was going to make a motion that and maybe I won't get a second to this motion, but I was going to make a motion that the commission adopt and recommend to the Board of Supervisors map number 9 and map number 10. I sensed a consensus among the commissioners that those two maps were on everybody's list of maps that they feel comfortable recommending to the Board of Supervisors. And so if that is the consensus of my fellow commissioners, I would make that motion and see if there's a second.
Paula?
I'll second it for the purposes of discussion.
I would prefer that we, if we have the time, that we look at Dee's recommendation, starting with draft 10, and work on that a little bit before we make a motion, before we move forward with map selection.
I guess the response.
I would be willing to amend my motion if
I'm going to not be willing to change my motion. And the reason is I'm uncomfortable making changes to these proposed maps on the fly. If we're going to vote on recommending maps to the Board of Supervisors tonight, I would be open to the notion of the commissioners making recommendations to improve the maps beyond what we recommend tonight, and specifying what those recommendations would be in terms of how they might be improved by the board. But since we're not going to be able to vote on those maps again before they're presented to the Board of Supervisors, I couldn't support modifying the maps as they're presented to us tonight. I'm either voting, in my mind, I'm either voting to support a map as it stands tonight, or I'm not. And I won't vote for a map with a caveat that it will be modified to suit some purpose in the future. I'm happy to see the commissioners go on record as saying that they have thoughts about recommendations for ways to improve the maps that we do recommend, but I'm not comfortable approving a map with the caveat that it'll be modified between now and when it's presented to the board, because I can't look at that map and I can't see what it does to all the various variables on that map. So I'm not willing to change my motion.
So I'm not familiar enough with Robert rules at this point. It does seem like, you know, I'm not going to vote on maps, especially seeing that, as Peter, you have mentioned many times, this process has already been curtailed. I see no reason to basically not utilize this meeting to look at some extremely minor modifications that we will be able to quantitatively assess in real time, and may come up with just a little tiny weensy bit better map. I mean, if you look at what the two we're talking about, we're looking at what we did in the last meeting with mostly Dee's recommendations as somebody who's familiar with the Ukiah area. That's the only difference between maps 9 and 10 are some minor modifications to the urban issue that we're dealing with in this map. So I would like some direction from Charlotte. How do we, whether or not Peter's going to vote on the possibility of draft 11, we can still, how do we leave screen up and just look at that? I understand that Peter might not wish to vote for draft 12.
Mr. Chair, I mean, the problem is that we'd be voting on maps that we would be a new map. It'd become a map number 12, not a map number 11. And the public wouldn't have any opportunity to provide input to us as a commission on those changes. And that's why I object to it. I think if you want to do it, the way to do it is to adopt the maps that the public has had an opportunity to review and provide input to us on. Let us vote on those maps. And then if you want to add to and say, well, let's say map number 10 is your favorite map, and you just want to change it a little bit, then after we've adopted it, you can propose an amendment or propose a action of this commission to send a message to the Board of Supervisors that you think the map number 10 could be improved by making those changes. Which case, I think you deliver the same message to the Board of Supervisors, but then that map would be considered by the board. The public would have an opportunity to submit their thoughts to the board on it. But I'm unwilling to vote on a map contingent that the public hasn't seen, even if it's a minor change.
I understand that you're unwilling to vote on that map, but I know that Dee would like to look at that map, and that's what we're in right now. I think we jumped forward because of the Zoom meeting dynamic. We're jumping forward towards an unnecessary vote before we've heard the full interest of the rest of the board. And I think this is a complication of Zoom rather than a complication of Robert's rules under Zoom, rather than simply calling out the GIS program and taking a look at these minor changes. It just seems really easy. Charlotte?
Through the chair, I believe the commission right now, has agendized this to be a discussion and consideration of maps. For one, the commission has not yet looked at map 10 as a commission, and so that would be something to look at. And in addition to any changes you might suggest or recommend to that map, and that could also be considered. But I really defer to the commission when you conclude your discussion on maps and on the draft maps that we have published for today's meeting to be discussed, and any past maps that we've already discussed. At the point when it is natural to the commission to address recommendations and voting, I think at that time would be an appropriate time to discuss the recommended maps and make any vote. But I don't think there's anything precluding the commission from taking a look at map 10, taking a look at any other map previously published, and just asking questions, adjusting with Leaf's assistance. And if you choose, as a majority, if the commission chooses to recommend a map that has been published with modifications that may make it a map 12 or later map, that's fine as well. But I do defer to the commission to make those recommendations, those decisions.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Leaf to pull up draft number 10 and share a screen. Paula, did you have a comment?
Well, one of my kind of a question for Charlotte and a comment. So Charlotte, if you're doing a narrative, would this type of discussion come into that narrative? Number one. Number two, we do have a motion on the floor, which we really need to do something about. And then the other is to once again reaffirm the Board of Supervisors is going to make the final decision. So we can tweak until the cows come home, and they're going to take, and they're probably going to tweak some more. So, little tiny tweaks here and there, while I think important for us, and if that gets carried through in the narrative, that would be great, so that we at least can be agreeing on just a couple of the maps. That's it. I'll unraise my hand.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to move ahead adopting drafts 9 and 10. So I will ask everybody yes or no. So Peter? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
I was going to say, typically there's a second before it goes to a vote. And so if there are no, if you want to pull for a second, that would be.
I think Paula had seconded it.
I had.
Paula?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I did second.
Yes.
Mary?
I would like to look at map 10. I'm perfectly ready to defer for a little bit on the map choice. So I would like to look and see particularly as leaf, if it's a minor change, can give us some idea of numbers.
So is that a no? For now,
That's a no,
Paula,
for now.
Whoops, I voted yes.
you voted yes.
Yes.
Dee
No.
and Kyle, no. So let's pull up draft 10.
This is map 10 in front of you. And based on, it's pretty much map draft 9 with these exceptions. That based on some of the testimony and concern, we took the Cave Creek boundary or the Cave Creek subdivision, that portion that we moved into 3, used to be in 1, we put it back in 1. So you can see here's the current boundary, and that Cave Creek area is right in here. So this is the current boundary now, and we brought it back to that current boundary. We kind of did a little research that it's our reasoning being that it is accessed through Redwood Valley was probably correct. And that winter travel, even though that they have access to Canyon Road and Hurst Willits Road, they're going north from there to Willits, has a few problems in the winter. Just to show you the difference that we have. Here's what we were looking at in draft 9, where we actually included that into the first district. And again, you can see on draft 10 where we put that back to the existing boundary. The other difference is we took a look at the western hills around Ukiah, and there's some blocks right in here. We started adjacent and started moving out by adding the ones adjacent to the city in. And we quickly have a population that was pretty large. So we're looking at 18,988 as it stands right now, and that's getting over 3%. And unfortunately, the next one that would be adjacent is this large block here that wraps around the entire area, goes way down here to Boonville Road and includes, some area in the Oak Knoll neighborhood as well. And that would have put them over the population limit. It would have made them, the second district, populated to the extent that then you ran into trouble with the 10% variation. So we quickly got stymied, so to speak, in trying to accomplish that tasks. But we were able to add a few of these up to the first ridge line. So that was sort of our best attempt there. Otherwise, this map is pretty similar to 9. Let me check down here. Yes. Let's turn off the current. Okay, so 9 included this block up in here off of Norgard Lane, and this area between the airport and State Street, South State Street, into the 2nd District. And in draft 10, because one of our earlier drafts brought this down to Plant Road, at least adjacent to the highway and South State Street, made an effort to see if we could get that in there, and yes, we can. So that was added as well. A lot of this is an industrialized area, but it does have population. So we were able to get that in on draft 10. Otherwise, this boundary here is the same as in draft 9. This is in draft 9 here as well, going up to Laytonville as well, and maintaining the existing boundary between Mendocino and Casper. You know, there's still issues here. I mean, there's going to be people outside in this area here in the hills that consider themselves that Hopland is their community of interest, and probably rightly so. But that's as far as we were able to, you know, we added a little bit more area in draft 9, and this is the same area in draft 10, outside of the census designated place of Hopland, to try to pick up as much as the Hopland community of interest as we could. You know, as in the draft 9, this area in here is about 1,000 people. It's just north of the city limits, but outside the city. Zinfandel Drive, south of Lovers Lane. There's about 1,000 people, as I said. That used to be in the 1st District. We had to move that because of all the other adjustments into the 5th District to make everything work. This was in District 2. We've kept that in District 2. As the commission might remember, we threw around a lot of different ideas, but they all involve splitting this area probably up into 3 districts as opposed to just 2. So the decision was made to leave it as is, as in draft 9, and keep it in the 5th District. So there's some of the issues. There's always been an issue up in here, this area, Black Bart Drive, Walker Lake Road, Muir Mill Road. We tried to get more of this into the 3rd District, but this is as best we could do with again, it's one of those issues. This area was in the 5th District, and we moved it into the 4th District to try to solve some of that population problem. And again, this line between the 4th and the 3rd was moved to the east. So it now comes up right up to Brook Trails and the city of Willits. And that, you know, that's one of those boundary lines that is, yes, you're going to be on one side of that boundary line or the other, and your community of interest that you believe may be on one side or the other. So there's some of the, and you know, that's sort of a negative aspect of both 9 and 10. You know, the other one that, you know, we've had a lot of comment about is this boundary here is Spy Rock Road. So everyone south of Spy Rock along this road is going to be to the south, and to the east is in the 3rd District. Everyone to the north and the west now is in the 4th District, and so is the Bell Springs Road area. They're going to be in the 4th District. Leggett was in the 4th District, even though they want to be in the 3rd District. But this is another one of those changes where we move that boundary to the east to try to balance the population. Some of the pluses, you know, as we've mentioned, we were able to get a lot more of the Laytonville area to stay in 3rd District. We brought, we made the 5th District considerably smaller, while keeping the Mendocino-Casper boundary the same. Tried to keep the 5th District east of Highway 101, which we've accomplished. and moved, Hopland into the first district. So that's sort of some of the accomplishments we make with both version 9 and 10. But
Leaf, based
sort of-
on community of interest testimony, is there anything we lose moving from 9 to 10?
Well, a bit. One might say it's minor, but if that was your input, it's probably not a minor issue. So turn off this here. Okay. Some of the community input that we had was that these neighborhoods down here that are outside the city be moved into the second district. They're densely populated, even though they're small blocks. It's very difficult to get them in without not balancing the population. Draft 9 pulls in these areas here that used to be in District 1 into District 2. Draft 10, as in earlier drafts, brought it down to Plant Road, which we got some positive feedback on. So again, this is Draft 9 boundary here. We turn that off. We turn on Draft 10 boundary. You can see we've gotten down to Plant Road along the South State Street, Highway 101 area, as well as keeping these areas, putting them into the second district. In one sense, that was based on community of interest comment directly. A secondary note was that, adding Hopland into the first district required you to get rid of some area from the first district. It kind of complicates a little bit that we still have to get the population out of the third district. So we actually added some area into the first district from District 3, although in version 10, that's less area than we added in version 9. So version 9 adds more of third district into the first district. Version 10 adds quite a bit less. And those, I believe, are the main differences. As I mentioned up here, this boundary stayed the same in version or draft 9 and 10. You can see, sorry for that, how the current one puts this area into, keeps it, well, it's currently in District 1. That's our current boundary right now. And that would be draft 10. So, as I mentioned before, this area in draft 10 was added. You can see the boundary in draft 9. So we've added this area right in here up to about the first ridge line. Beyond that, the next block would bring them quite a bit over our recommended population.
Dee, do you feel satisfied having fully fought for the district you're here to represent the interests of?
I think this is the best we can do. I think map 10 is the best that we can do.
So Ron, who I think has been a great contribution to last meeting, said from a marketing perspective, he thinks we should fully come behind one of these maps. I think that map number 10 is better from a community from the community of interest comment that we've received than map number 9. And that's what my question to Leaf was, is there anything that you had to sacrifice? Or was map 10 simply a more refined map 9, which is what it seems to be to me?
Yeah.
The changes from draft 9 to 10 were solely based on the comments of the commissioners from our last meeting. And so they respect how the commissioners are trying to refine the map.
I also think that they are minor enough changes between these two maps that since the Board of Supervisors is going to be further refining them, it's kind of redundant to send both of them because they will refine them in the same ways that we just have. So my recommendation, I'm not making a motion, my recommendation is that we go ahead with just draft 10. I think it's a more sort of powerful statement from the commission about what we feel the community of interest or the community has told us they would like. You had your hand raised for a second.
I agree with you. I think map 10 best captures the community interest comments that we've received to the very best of our ability, as well as meeting the population criteria.
Mary?
I agree. You know, it's been evolving. It's an evolutionary process. And as we collected data, we talked, we developed, we tried. I think that this is probably our best output so far. And as we don't have any more time, I agree with map 10.
I also think with map 10, the way that Leaf ended up moving the 4th 5 boundary south, since there are no bridges over that river, actually makes a lot of sense. It wasn't the intention, it was part of the balancing process, but I think that was a positive thing that happened. And, you know, I really should have been the one to be bringing forth, you know, some of these communities that are north of Redwood Valley, but end up coming into Redwood Valley. And this map, you know, not because we heard that public comment, because I don't think people, that was on their radar. But it turns out that this actually makes a lot of sense to me as well. And I've asked a few different people up that direction, and they were, you know, pleasantly surprised to hear that. So is it, I'm still learning Robert's rules, would it be appropriate to hear public comment before a motion is made on which maps we're going to send?
Chair Farmer, that is correct.
So if there's no more commissioner comment, I'd like to hear public comment on this item.
We have 3 public comments. Well, the first one's Paul. Paul, you're able to speak now. Okay, we're just going to move on then to Michael.
Good evening. Thank you so much. This has been a very informative conversation. I'm just curious, from looking at this map, it's kind of hard to tell with the southern border of District 4 and the northern border of District 5, if that is Kamchi-Ukiah Road, would that mean that the southern part of Kamchi-Ukiah Road would be in District 5, but the northern part would be in District 4? Is that clarity that could be provided?
Leaf, could you answer that?
It's actually along the on the river. So you can see Ukiah Kamchi Road is down here. And here's Flynn Creek Road.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And that's the river. That river being Big River, excuse me.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Okay, next will be Ron Edwards.
Yes, I would like to thank you for your efforts on this. And when you were worried about making changes, this is the most accessible public meeting in Mendocino County in the past year and a half. You allow people to find out about this meeting, raise their hand, ask questions, and provide input. And I think that you guys really take that information into account. And I really appreciate you guys narrowing it down and taking the time to come with one recommendation, because I think that really is, one of the things I learned in graduate school was that, when your boss asks you for something, give them it on one piece of paper. And I think you guys are trying to narrow that down and really doing your job. And I will really support you in your efforts on this. Thank you very much.
And we will try Paul one more time. All right, that's it for public comment.
Well, thank you, everybody. I would like to make a motion that we put draft 10 forth to the Board of Supervisors.
I'll second.
A little bit hard for me to do the vote with the screen shared. Peter?
I can unshare.
Do we have any discussion on the motion?
The motion is simply, this is a question on the motion. The motion is simply to recommend map number 10 to the Board of Supervisors for consideration.
Yes.
As it stands, okay. And as the maker of the motion, I have a question about procedure, and also since you're the chair, Kyle, is the chair going to entertain subsequent motions to consider other maps that we have before us?
Yes, I see no reason not
After
to.
this vote? So we're going to take
I see no reason not to.
So in regard to that, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on the process. So whatever other maps that we might recommend, we would, unless the motion specified specifically, we would just note that it would be of equal value or the same value in terms of a recommendation. In other words, this is a recommendation for map number 10, but if we adopted, say, map number 9, then it would have the same value as a recommendation, unless it was made as this would be our second choice, something like that. Is that correct?
I see no reason why that wouldn't be the case. I think by the time this gets to the Board of Supervisors, it's just going to be a short stack of maps along with a narrative. So I do think that the narrative of draft 10 is that we sat down around draft 9 and turned it into draft 10.
I mean, I could point out some things that when I did my analysis, and I just want to say, my analysis of the data that we were presented in the input we considered in regard to these maps, I found that map number 9 and map number 10 were very close in terms of their relative value. I rated map number 9 higher for a few reasons. One, the population variation is 0.3% less in map number 9 than it is in map number 10. Also, the relative impact on communities of interest was slightly less by the way I assessed that in map number 9 versus map number 10. And did you have a question about that?
Yeah, what was your analysis there?
Well, there were, let's see, I'm looking at my notes. In district 1, 2, and 3, there were additional moves of populations in the borderline areas in those 3 districts that impacted the communities of interest beyond what they had been impacted in map number 9. For example, when I looked at the number of people in District 1 that were shifted from one district to another, in map number 9, there was only 15 people. But in map number 10, it's 141 people. When I looked at district number 2, there was a shift of about 100 people from one district to another. And again, in district number 3, a shift of about 100 people, a little less than that. So there were in total somewhere approximating about 220 additional shifts of people between maps 9 and 10. Now, those are relatively small shifts, but they also were reflected in the fact that the population variable shifted up 0.3% between those 2 maps. And from my standpoint, it was close in terms of their relative value, but there was enough of a difference so that I rated map number 9 as a better map in my mind than map number 10 in terms of meeting our stated goal and responsibility. So while I can support map number 2 because it's my second choice,
10. You mean 10?
I do think map number 9 is a better map in my opinion. For those reasons.
I do kind of, if I understand your quantitative analysis right, it seems like you're kind of putting profit and loss in the same column. I mean, if you move a population between 2 districts in a way that is congruent with our community of interest letters, that seems like that goes in the positive column. And if you have to move them for population balancing in a way that either that doesn't go with or against our community of interest, that would be a sort of a null column, a 0 column. And if you're making a population balancing move that is against the letters, such as some of the moves we've had to make in Laytonville area, north of Laytonville, that would be in the negative column. So I think that would be the way to do that, those quantifications. It seems like what Leaf pulled off on Cave Creek, since the roads are clearly heading that direction and the people that I know up Tom Kai area, spend their time coming back into Redwood Valley. I'm sure that's not a universal. And the plant road move that happened between 9 and 10 is clearly consistent with community of interest letters that we've received. I mean, a lot of those people would prefer that it moved even further. So a lot of those moves I would put in the positive column rather than viewing every move as a negative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if you can quantitatively or through some systematic way assess whether these impacts are negative or plus to any certainty, then I wouldn't dispute that at least in theory you'd be right. On the other hand, we just don't have that kind of detailed input from these areas. It's not that I would disagree with your logic as much as we don't have actual data that's sufficient to reach that conclusion that they're either positive or negative. What I can tell you is that the data says very clearly there was a change in those 3 districts between and I will say this, between map number 9 and number 10, the 4th and the 5th district have no change. So all of the changes that you're talking about are either between the 1st, the 2nd, or the 3rd district. They all impact those 3 districts, those 3 communities along those border lines. And based on the limited input that we've gotten, I can't conclude they're either positive or negative, only that they are an additional impact on the community. And from my standpoint, when you can't conclude something based on strong data, then I think you have to hesitate, at least in terms of making that decision, Mike. So I'll grant you this. Simple logic, you could make the argument that map number 10 is better than map number 9. And I wouldn't be able to to conclusively prove you're wrong without doing a whole hell of a lot of additional research, which we don't have time to do. So it's just, what each of us as commissioners come down to is kind of what the data we have in front of us, what do we conclude? And I concluded map number 9 was a little better, just slightly, than map number 10, in my opinion.
Okay. Dee, I see your hand raised.
I originally raised my hand to say that I would like the motion to say that map number 10 is our first choice. I think that would be, to clarify it that way, that's up to you. But also in response to what the comments that Peter made, the way I hear it, Peter, is everything's about the numbers, about moving numbers between the districts, and we need to change that as little as possible. Well, we all bring something to this table here of the knowledge of our own communities, the communities that we live and work in. And whether, 66 people, emailed us or not, there was some known problems with the way the districts were lined out prior to this process. And we would be remiss if we didn't take that into consideration just because we didn't get an email from somebody who lived in that district or that area. I think we have worked really hard to take not only the data, but the knowledge that we have of our communities and the input that we had and make it work to the very best of our ability. It is so far from being perfect or where every citizen of this county has equal and fair representation, but within the criteria that we have been tasked to work within, we have done, I think, a really good job, regardless of the number change between what the districts were before and what the districts now. I think the process is so much bigger than just the numbers, even though the numbers are the bottom line for us. And I think it's important that we hold on to that and not just use the numbers and the changes in the numbers as our criteria, as our narrative, that we have really worked hard to represent even those voices that we haven't heard within this process, but may have heard outside of it, and done the very best that we can with what we have to work with. Thank you.
Dee, I would, as the chair, I'm going to have us, I put the motion forward on 10. We can then, someone else can put a motion forward on another map they might want us to vote on. I think that, Ron has an MBA, let's listen to him. I think that this putting one map forward is a good idea. And I think that what we're experiencing is sort of an artifact of the iterative process we've gone through. I mean, we could do the same sort of analysis on any sort of line on this whole map. But what we've done is we sort of dealt with 4 and 3 to the best of our abilities without affecting things below. And then Leaf sort of brought in an even greater second order thinking understanding and made some adjustments in more of that domino style, where he did start bringing in the rest of the counties into the line dance. And once we had kind of figured out a map that was pretty good, the difference between map 9 and 10 was mostly the people who are the commissioners for that area doing the job that could be done. I mean, I would have liked to I've been hearing from sort of my community of interest areas that we would like Hopland a little bit bigger, and so that didn't happen. But we could do the same analysis on any line of however many million lines there are in Mendocino County, if you include topography, right? There's many more miles topographically than acreage represents. And so that's why I think Ron had a good idea that we just do one map, but rather than that we try to vote and have an ordering and everything all in one vote, let's have one vote on this. We can have another vote if anybody wants to, if another map passes the vote, it will join the pool. And then another person can make a motion that we have the maps in a specific order, and we can vote on that. I think that's especially in the Zoom context where it's a little bit harder to kind of feel the convivial vibe of what other people are thinking. As sort of long as that might take, I think that's the way we should do it, rather than amending the motion to have the ordering of the maps along with the votes. It just seems like too much to hold. That makes sense. So should we put it to a vote? This is simply that we will submit draft number 10 to the Board of Supervisors. And I think D already seconded. So
Yes.
Peter,
I vote yes.
Question.
sorry, I didn't know who asked the question. Go ahead. Did somebody
Oh, I was
just say
just saying call for the question. I
Mary?
said call for the question, means vote. Means vote.
Okay. Thank you, Paula. Mary,
Yes.
Yes.
Paula,
Yes.
D,
Yes.
and Kyle, yes. So map 10 passes unanimously.
Okay.
Would anybody like to put another map up to the vote?
I'll move that we adopt map number 9 and also recommend it for consideration to the Board of Supervisors.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Paula. Paula, remind me what you just taught me to say.
Call for the question.
We should say it again.
I'm calling for the question.
I'm calling for the question. Okay, I'll use that in a second. But do we have any comment on this
Discussion.
discussion? I wish you were here. Do you
Um,
have any discussion on the motion? Yes, Peter?
Briefly, I just want to restate why. When I looked at the data that we had in front of us and the comments that we've received, I thought map number 9 was the best option. That's not in my motion, but that it was the best option. It meets the population variation requirement more efficiently than some of the other maps, but it has relatively low impact on communities or a relative lower impact on communities of interest. And it also helps serve to meet a one person, one vote equalization goal for districts. And so I rated it as the map that of all the maps we've looked at, the one that I felt was the best option. It's not perfect, but it was slightly better than the other maps, beginning with map number 10. And so I would make those comments and answer any questions about that anyone might have about. I think I pretty much explained why I saw the difference between map 9 and 10 already. So I won't go back into that unless somebody actually wants me to.
Thanks, Peter. Mary?
I understand Peter's logic. I think it would be reasonable to give it as an option, particularly since there is a difference in the numbers. However, my background is nursing and sociology and people. And I liked how this process has been open to communities of interest and to each of us knowing our own community and participating and giving to that process. So I will say I lean that way a little more anyway towards map 10, but I think there is an argument for giving them the choice. Thank you.
D?
I feel very strongly and agree with Ron and the comments that you've made, Kyle, that we should pick one. And I think 10 is our best option. The supervisors have access to all of these maps. And like we've said, they may change the maps. This is just a recommendation. I don't think that we should cloud the issue by submitting another map that is so close that it could just be confusing, and I don't support the motion.
Okay, I guess I'll call for the question. Peter,
Yeah.
I vote yes.
Dee,
No,
Mary,
Yes.
Paula,
Yes.
and Kyle, no. So map 9 carries with 3-2.
Just as a commentary, I think you probably have now rated the maps. On the basis of those votes. So maybe the ends justify the means, or the means justify the ends, and all of that in terms of giving to the Board of Supervisors.
They're going to do what they want anyway.
course,
So it's
yeah. Well, do we want to have a motion to rate the maps, or do we want to let it be implicit?
we leave
let it be
in.
implicit.
Are there any other maps that anyone wants to put forward to recommend to the board?
No.
I'm good with 2.
I'm good with 2.
Yeah.
I personally am going to print out number 3 and replace the title to just say sort of
Make it number 10.
political watersheds.
I think number 3 is the best.
Okay, I mean, I as I said in the supervisors meeting, I just keep on applauding Leaf. He pulled a lot of rabbits out of the hat. I did not see that you know, a map like this, pretty good map, is going to come out of this whole thing. So,
Okay.
so do we
Yeah,
have any
absolutely.
more, Paula?
Yeah, I do have a question. Are we about this narrative? I guess I could go back. Do we write something up that we say after due consideration and after, we got community input, these are our recommendations, or do we put any kind of notation with the recommendations? And who then writes that? And that may be a question for Charlotte.
Please go ahead, Charlotte.
Yes.
I was just going to offer that when we submit these to the Board of Supervisors, we envision preparing a very brief presentation, PowerPoint style, with Leaf being able to go in more closely to the maps should the board want to see those boundaries more closely, but with a couple of lines at most as to each map, and it's I feel that comfortable helping to prepare that with staff, and then address any additional comment that the chair or the commissioners want to add. I'm sure you can be available to add that. I don't know that the commission is required to come to a consensus on what that narrative exactly has to say. But if you choose to, we're happy to accommodate if you want to address that.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Answers my question.
Peter?
I would argue that maybe the best way to proceed is, rather than try to come up with some kind of explanation on the fly tonight and then have to have it transcribed by the staff, that it makes all of this is on the public record. All of the arguments, pro and con, that we've heard and made, I think, are on the public record. And I personally feel very comfortable, as I understand the format that's going to happen relative to it going to the Board of Supervisors, is that Kyle, as the chair, is going to report to the board the actions that the commission has made, and that I feel pretty comfortable saying that I think Kyle can summarize the thinking of the commission that we don't really need to come up with a statement here explaining, unless there's a commissioner who has drafted some kind of a statement in advance that they think they'd like. But since we didn't know what the outcome was going to be until we just took the votes, I'm comfortable having Kyle summarize for us in the Board of Supervisors meeting next week how we came to the conclusions on these two maps, and leave it at that. I'd be actually a little concerned at this point trying to draft something up. So that'd be my preference. It's just a preference.
Yeah, I think that in the end, Leaf is going to give the best explanation, and probably anything that we even try to consider what we would say, he'll end up saying better, and then we'll have to come up something on the fly in the middle of the meeting. So I think if there's anything very specific that wouldn't have otherwise been, that you don't think that the chair or staff would think to include, and that's something that can also be emailed, or if there's anything anybody wants to point out right now that we should make sure we include, not trying to draft something, but just anything that we should make sure not to overlook. Because I agree, drafting by consensus would probably be challenging. Dee?
Each of us will have the opportunity, I think, to make a comment if we wanted to. I think it's important that the presentation and whoever does the speaking would speak for the entire board and the entire commission, and what decisions we came through to and what our process was. But I think if there's anything that any one of us as an individual would like to add to the public comment, but we'll be given that opportunity just based on past meetings. So, and that would be a comment from you personally and not on behalf of the commission. So I think we can all handle that. I think the staff will do a very good job in capturing what we've done here.
Well, do we have any public comment on this item before we move on to adding some more meetings?
We do have one public comment. It's going to be Ron.
Yeah, thank you. And, I know it was difficult to come up with these two, and I think that Leaf is very good at presenting the data, because I think that it would be extremely helpful now as the board has to make a decision that they know how you came about this conclusion. In other words, the differences between the ratio between the districts. And I think that that would be helpful information for the board, because they are counting on you to dive deep, which you have really done. I mean, you guys have really taken the time to discuss this, to get public input. And I think that with Leaf presenting the data, I mean, in my perspective, it'll come out which one was your number one choice. But that's what the board needs. I mean, they are not participating in this. They're not experts in this. You were tasked to do this. And with that detailed presentation, I think would be very helpful to the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. That brings us to agenda item number 7. So tomorrow, staff will publish 2 to 4 maps. On the 9th, we'll have that Board of Supervisors meeting at 1:30. On the 11th, they will have their deadline to publish a final map. On the 18th, a special meeting set for the Board of Supervisors redistricting hearing to approve the final map. On December 7th, they will introduce the ordinance to adopt the final map, and on the 14th, they will read the ordinance. Do you have any commissioner comment on this item?
Nope.
And any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Dee, do you have a motion to add a meeting between meetings?
No.
Jerry?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a moment and thank each of you for your service to the County of Mendocino. Thank you so much for your time, your commitment, and just your dedication. So it's been a pleasure working with each of you. Thank you very much. And thank you to staff too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. I look forward to meeting you in person, as of the rest of you guys. I got to meet Charlotte at the trick-or-treating the other night.
Oh, very nice.
Paula? You're muted.
Unmute. There we go. I would like to just commend staff. You know, we did have one meeting that went way over, and you've been very accommodating. And sure, you've been wonderful with my computer issues. Leaf just deserves lots of kudos. I am sure this has not been easy for him putting all this in. So, and all the rest of you added so much information. And not that it's just totally been fun, it's been an interesting one. So thank you. And Kyle, you're really good as a chair. A new skill you can add to a resume.
Mary?
My thanks to staff, all of staff. You've done an amazing support job, and we could not have done it without you. And your comments have been weighed very carefully in how you present things with people who are not within the system itself. Finally, this has been a fantastic group to work with. We've had different views, we bring different ideas, but in terms of working with people, each and every one of you have been a pleasure. So thank you very much.
Peter?
I'm going to add my kudos 1,000 times over to the staff for supporting this commission the way they have. Under what I'd like to also add were very difficult circumstances. I think it'd be remiss not to point out that the census data was submitted months after it should have been, and that necessitated compacting the time frame that the commission had to operate under. And I want to further, laud Leaf for his outstanding work under very challenging circumstances relative to trying to take what people inputted in terms of what they verbalized to him or in writing, and to translate that in terms of census blocks as lines on maps, and to give us data in a fast turnaround. I would also ask the chair, and I'm not going to put this in the form of a motion because I don't think it's agendized, so it probably wouldn't be appropriate anyway. But from a personal standpoint, I'm going to ask the chair that when you speak to the Board of Supervisors, you make an appeal for additional resources for this effort 10 years from now, in the context of really two things. One is hopefully this is something that they will have control over, but we won't have a census that delivers data to us late. And the second part of that would be, I do think, as much as I appreciate the heroic effort Leaf made, we could have done better. We could have had better software, computer support from the standpoint of what we really, I think, would have made this process much better is if we had the real-time capacity for the public to actually draw the maps using the census block data and be able to explore what the implications of proposed maps would have been in terms of population variation, in terms of impacts on districts, in terms of voting age population. And so my appeal would be to express to the board that rather than just forget these challenges that we had to face and overcome in regard to our work here, that we remind them that they made to meet some kind of a commitment the next go around, that there are improvements that we could make to this process that would make it even better. And that would be my request of the chair, that you communicate that to the board, and hopefully they would make note of it for the purposes of future action.
I will do that. And as Dee mentioned as well, I can do that, but there's also, the possibility for public comment if you want to say that directly. But I will definitely bring that up. I would have loved to be using Districtor.
Yeah.
Do we have any other commissioner comment?
We do have one more public comment, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to ask for that.
On, you can go ahead and talk.
Yeah, Peter, 100% on what you said, presenting to the board. And I think that, going forward, they should look at population growth, where the county is gaining and losing, so that they can be prepared. So that when you guys meet, or whoever the board is that meets in the future, is equipped with the best data going forward. And this Zoom format has allowed this county, which is so broad and so spread out, to participate in this. And I hope that that is something that you can bring to the board, Chair, also. Thank you. And thank you guys for the work you've done for all these meetings. And it's just been an incredible learning opportunity, a teaching opportunity, and a participating opportunity. Once again, thank you.
I don't know why Ron is saying when they are doing this in 10 years from now, because it's going to be him.
Some of us are
I'm
really old.
73. I don't know about 83.
No, I'm saying Ron. I don't know how old Ron is, but I think he needs to be on the next. Well, Peter, you'll have to figure out with that data what 10 years is going to look like. That is least points about, what's going to happen to that 9-year-old in 10 years voting and so on and so forth. That gets pretty interesting. Well, we are digressing pretty rapidly.
Said, but I doubt that that's going to change much. I suspect the demographic's still going to be that they're going to be families with more children on the eastern side of the county, and a lot of seniors who retire from other places arriving to live in their paradise retirement home on the coast. And I think that's what really swings that demographic.
Yeah.
More than anything else. So, and yeah, there will always be kids growing up to become voters, but there are also people who are going to move from the inland over to the coast after their kids go off to college, because they've decided that, I'd like to live over on that coast with that nice cool breeze, like Paula and Peter.
As long as we can keep the hospital infrastructure up, right? And all the medical infrastructure up enough to.
Yeah, right.
Sherry?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to state that our clerk of the board, that states there, the clerk of the commission is Dylan. So thank you, Dylan. We haven't seen his face, but there he's there for us. And then also thank you to the information services for also staying. So that's the Mendocino County video that you see. So our information staff have been broadcasting it on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Paula?
No, I don't know how to deal with this thing. I'll just be glad when computers are gone. Okay.
Well, I will make a motion of this, but when COVID is finally calmed down, I suggest we all get together for a cup of tea.
There
you go.
There we go. Something stronger, I hope.
Yeah.
So I will make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Paul. Let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye.